Global product sourcing makes custom apparel, drinkware, tote bags, and so much more merch to help you promote your brand. Seriously, I checked their website, and you can even get branded mosquito repellent for all of you mosquito paranoid Las Vegans. They're locally owned and operated and have created custom promotional items for Lee's Discount Liquors, Steiner's Pubs, and Aviators Baseball. They'll help you find the right product for your timeline and your budget. Go to thegpsinc.com. That's thegpsinc.com, thegpsinc.com. The Mirage is closing July 17th. And aside from its volcano show, it will probably be best remembered for the legacy of Siegfried and Roy's Tiger Act, as well as its dolphin aquarium. But were animals on the Strip ever a good idea? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, I'm talking to Susan Nance. She's a professor of history at the University of Guelph, and she has researched the long history of animal shows on the Las Vegas Strip. We're going to talk about what will happen to the animals at the Mirage, and if there could ever be another animal show as spectacular. It's Tuesday, July 9th. I'm Sarah Lohman, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Susan, the Mirage is closing. So what's going to happen to all the Mirage animals?
Hi, Sarah. Well, this is always a puzzle. It's much easier to start up an animal show than it is to close one down sometimes, because it's very difficult to dispose of large animals that need very specific care. So a lot of the animals have been dispersed already. Siegfried and Roy's tigers had been still around, some of them still on display.
Oh, really?
And, a number of them, for a while they were, after the show closed 20 years ago. For a while they were, a number of them have been sent to a sanctuary in Oregon that has big cats and can sort of take care of them. And then the dolphins, this is a little bit also, complicated. And I think that when Hard Rock took over Mirage, this was one of the big puzzles they had to solve. If having a dolphin display doesn't really suit the brand anymore, what do we do? And so a number of these dolphins had been on loan from SeaWorld in San Diego in any event. So they just went back. And then others were sent to other facilities. A number of them died. A few have died, which is a little bit sad. It can happen sometimes. It's for a dolphin going in an airplane or in a truck to another place is not
really not meant to travel that way.
It's not easy. Yeah. And if you had any other health issues, it can get dangerous for sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, it seems like the Mirage was a turning point for animal shows on the Strip. In what ways was it a big turning point on the Strip?
Well, I think just the scale, which makes sense because this was Steve Wynn's vision, was that these resorts should be enormous. It was all about scale for him. And animal shows had been around since, there's probably always been a few, displays of birds and cages and this kind of thing since the early days, late 19th century. But in the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of chimpanzee shows that became, or a number of chimpanzee shows that became popular. Yeah. And they sort of went out of popularity with adults because it was mostly an adult-oriented city. And then the production shows in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the ones that would have had the dancers with the big feathered headdresses and the glittering bikinis, they often included an animal show as well. So, but then they were part of sort of a larger production. So the scale of things really changed with the Mirage because Siegfried and Roy were approached by Steve Wynn. And there was an agreement made that we need to extract the animal show part, really put a lot of money into it and make it into a giant show where it's just one act, right? And Siegfried and Roy did this with great success for many years. And the show made a lot of money by really giving so much capital to a show or to the production that it could be really glamorous and exciting to the viewer. Just sort of, instead of being sort of a shabby element in a larger show, it was the best that it could possibly be.
What were these earlier chimpanzee shows like?
Well, in Las Vegas, in the post-war period, right, people had a lot more money, more people buying cars, people able to travel. Las Vegas really started to blossom, and in that really sort of affluent society that was developing. And it did so at the same time television was really getting going. And a lot of the people and animals who appeared on television also came to Las Vegas. So there was sort of a relationship there. There was a fad on early TV for chimpanzees as like sort of gags that would appear on talk shows or on kids shows. So of course, Las Vegas, they had chimpanzee shows as well. Sometimes the same chimpanzee and trainer going between these different venues. It's a little bit strange to think about now because there's no audience for it now. But at the time, there was a segment of the audience that was interested in seeing a sort of either circus style show or a comedy act that involved a chimpanzee. And these would appear in, some of the same resorts as you would find Frank Sinatra or Lena Horne, which I find counterintuitive because they seem to represent kind of high culture and low culture.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that movie Nope that came out a couple summers ago that explored that sort of Hollywood history and chimpanzee shows, the things that went along with it. And then after that, you mentioned like what kind of animal shows would be a part of like the Folies Bergère and like all of those sparkly floor shows?
It changed all the time. It changed depending on what was going on inside a particular show. If a particular artist decided they want to quit or they were too difficult to work with and they were fired. So there's no sort of hard and fast rule. But one thing that did happen in the started sort of the 1970s and 80s was a phenomenon I call tiger magic shows, which were magic or illusion performances that involved a big cat. And of course, it is a cliche that magicians have employed animals for a long time, right? Pulling a rabbit out of a hat is an old gag, or a bird out of one's coat pocket, and so on, right? That was an element in a number of the production shows in those years where, if not every resort, not every property had a production show, but if you had one, someone was sort of obligated to have some kind of magician with an animal. And there was a fad for shows employing big cats, mostly tigers. Siegfried and Roy became sort of the most famous example, but there was many of them, and they still exist. When I was in Las Vegas this past spring, Jay Owen House had his tent set up on the Strip. No tigers this time, but in the past, he has a collection of big cats and he has used them in his shows. And I think there was controversy about that in terms of how would they be housed behind the scenes? Do we really want them living in some kind of enclosure on the Strip? Are there safety issues for the audience and so on?
Yeah, especially after the incident that closed the Siegfried and Roy show 20 years ago.
Right, exactly. People have not forgotten that I think there was always a big risk and people just became... Siegfried and Roy's shows were so successful for so long, people forgot the risk they were taking.
Yeah, the animals were tightly trained, but if I remember correctly, one of the tigers got distracted and then was protecting Roy, but bit him in the process of it. Is that...
Well,
was that the story that they released?
Debate continues. Officially, the story that Siegfried and Roy told people was that they believed the tiger was trying to protect him because he was having a medical episode. Other people say no, the tiger was distracted and just not in the mood, and Roy had not been spending as much time with the cats as they had in the past. And when you do that, it just adds that little element of the unpredictable that can result in disaster. And I think Siegfried and Roy in those days, they'd been doing that show for a long time. It's exhausting. You have to be perfect every time. And they were getting older, and so inevitably there's going to come a point where you miss a cue or you're just a little bit too tired or not quite noticing something. Today, I don't know that you could get a show like that insured because the tigers were not restrained. They could have jumped off the stage and run up the aisle towards the bar in the lobby at any time.
So this is potentially the end of animal shows like that on the Strip.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Jay Owen House was doing it a few years back, that the animals were tethered. But again, I think insurance companies are only getting more conservative as time goes by, the kinds of risks they'll take on. And I think also there's just many members of the public wouldn't want to be in that situation either. That segment of the population that is interested in seeing a show like that is shrinking still. And I don't know, I think Siegfried and Roy's run at the Mirage, where it was a really mainstream show where all sorts of people, adults, kids, all sorts of people would go. But it was quite expensive. I think that was sort of the peak.
Want to know one of my favorite sounds? Here it is. That's the sound I hear when I'm learning Spanish with Babbel. And if you want to learn a new language this year, I guarantee it'll be one of your favorite sounds too. I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, and I've been doing Babbel for a few weeks, and it's been so much fun. This week, I've been learning lots of food vocabulary and how to order in a restaurant. This is one of the things I love about Babbel, is that it's about learning the language so that you can use it. As Babbel says, it's designed by real people for real conversation. So it's all based on real life situations. And these restaurant lessons are awesome. When I went to Mexico City last year with my girlfriend, I was mute. I was a mute. But next time, I'm going to be ordering the sopes and las salsas picantes. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So, part of the reason that Siegfried and Roy were at the Mirage is that, this was Wynn's earliest vision of a sort of transportative resort. And the Mirage had this big volcano out front because he wanted these like tropical East Asian sort of feelings. And a part of that was the dolphin aquarium as well. And there were other sea creatures there too, weren't there?
There was a gigantic aquarium right behind the front desk, which was quite spectacular.
Crabs and things, right?
Yeah, tropical fish.
Yeah.
Creatures swimming back and forth behind the head of the persons who's asking you for your credit card. Yeah.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Bring you into that tropical moment, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like Las Vegas is still in an aquarium Europe when we're talking about animals on the Strip. There's Mandalay Bay. There's even the Shark Tank at the pool at the Golden Nugget. There's the Mermaid Aquarium at the Silverton. Are these to you like late phase animal shows?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of what is left, and that they may last for a long time because we've had aquariums for a long time, long before Las Vegas. They sort of date back to the 19th century, and it's a way to display animals in ways that are, not so dangerous potentially or risky. And also they display animals for whom or with whom people are less critical. People don't identify with fish and crustaceans and sea urchins in the same way that they might with a tiger or a dolphin. And unless you're really an expert, you're not going to have any idea if these animals have good welfare or are suffering. Most of us aren't trained to sort of recognize, are these fish in a large enough tank, or is there something about the nature of the tank that's causing them stress? And so they're dying quite often of being replaced. Public will never know that. So I think because of that, they're easier to use to decorate a facility and not get any kind of backlash, no demonstrations. Probably not going to be targeted by PETA, which is always a problem.
Are there unique issues to having aquatic life in the middle of the desert?
Well, if they're in a tank indoors, I think it's the same as running an aquarium anywhere. I know that it is expensive, though. But of course, a lot of these resorts, it's not about sparing expense, right? It's about having a very lavish or very sort of unexpected element. And water, there will always be water displays in Las Vegas. There's this wonderful irony, right? This idea of coming to an oasis in the desert. And so I think whether it's an aquarium or a fountain or a canal.
Yeah,
there
yeah.
will always be water displays.
Yeah, it really feels like an extravagance, this show of water. And I was trying to think of other strip animals. There's the flamingos at the Flamingos, and I got to see the keepers put on a pretty like hilarious show there. Even about the local animals that stop by, she warned us that the grackles will steal our wallet. So, we get some visitors, and there's water involved there. And I was thinking about, too, are you familiar with the Piff the Magic Dragon show on the Strip?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Would you say that Mr. Piffles, the Chihuahua, is the last non-human performer on the Las Vegas Strip?
No, because there's the Popovich Pet Theater that also has dogs and cats. They're in a little theater inside the Miracle Mall.
I was not aware of them.
Miracle Mile Mall.
I want to see trick doing cats. Little cats, house cats.
They're house cats, and there's dogs, and there's some fowl. I just saw that show in March. So there's that show. There's the sort of mini zoo or sort of aquarium at Mandalay Bay, and there's the Piff show. And that's got to be about it, other than the aquariums that you mentioned earlier. So there's not much left, and a lot of it is aimed at kids and families, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask if Mr. Piffles was the hardest working animal on the Strip, but I don't actually think that's true. Mr. Piffle seems to be luxuriating in his old age in his show.
Yeah, I think, and the Popovich Pet Theater show I noticed was the same thing. He's got many different cats and dogs and birds, so each of them does like a little bit. So they have a pretty easy workload.
Good.
I'm hoping.
Good. So why did animal shows seem to fit so well into this lure of Las Vegas entertainment?
Well, I think there's just such a diverse audience that comes with different interests. And so you need sort of a critical mass of people who are interested in a particular thing. What that is changes over time. And there will always be people who sort of poo-poo. So, for example, the chimpanzee shows, and then with Berrettini's orangutan show that was at the Sahara for many years, there was complaints from the critics in the newspapers and presumably other people that these were really kind of crude shows, that was sort of dumb humor, or that they wondered about the people who are interested to go to these shows. And I saw one reviewer in the newspaper said, listen, there's just always going to be a part of the audience wants to see this stuff. To them, it's amazing. And even if we think it's dumb. So what was your question again?
Well, I think you answered it. It was, why did this fit so well? But maybe the follow-up question was, were these shows ever a good idea?
Oh, that's a complicated question because as a historian, you see, I'm not supposed to, and I really try not to be too judgy about things that people did in the past because they lived in their own times and there was their own values.
Worldview. Sure.
Yes. I think generally no, because now when I look at the photographs of Berrettini and his orangutans or some of the early chimpanzee shows or the dolphins and the tank and the Mirage, I think these are such precious beings. How could we have used them in this way? It just seems like we're frittering them away. In those times, though, even if most of the population would not be interested in starting up an animal show, there's always a small number of people who want to do that. And they may even use the fact that these animals are endangered in the wild as an excuse for why they need to be held captive and put to use, which people have. And zoos and aquariums often make that argument still, that the wild is too dangerous. So we need to keep these animals in captivity to save them. And you can imagine there's people argue against that.
Yeah.
So were they a good idea for the individual animals that were there? Generally not, I would say. On the other hand, I don't know that I can speak for them. And some of them were taken away from situations where they maybe couldn't have lived in the wild or they were born in captivity. They didn't really have a choice. In other cases, they were part of this sort of exotic and wild animal trade that exists in the shadows of zoos and aquariums and these kinds of entertainment shows that involve getting animals by going out into the wild, killing the adults and taking the babies. And this is something people don't realize. When you see photographs of, people holding a baby chimp from 1956, that's only 2 or 3 months old. That means that chimpanzee saw his or her parents killed and was, sort of stolen away from wherever he was living. So for a lot of the individuals, it wasn't a good life. The other danger, I think, is just one of my arguments I try to make about these shows, and I think it's part of the reason why people are less interested in them now, is that we know that this kind of attitude towards the environment is getting us into some trouble. This idea that you can just take whatever you want, you can do whatever you want with animals. It's that kind of attitude that has sort of led us down the road towards global warming, right? The sense that we can do whatever we want to the environment with no consequences.
Yeah, it's not the wild that's dangerous, it's human beings.
Yeah, well, we are the apex predator on the globe in a lot of ways, right? So I think I just think changing environmental attitudes, and also the amount of information that you can get online now. If you want to find out if somebody has a baby chimpanzee, where did he come from?
Yeah,
in 1950s or 60s, you couldn't really ask that question. You had no idea. So the dark side, the behind the scenes stuff was much easier to obscure before the internet, and now people just have access to so much more information if they want it.
Do you think that there is some kind of new kind of animal show on the horizon for Vegas?
No.
Good.
No.
Good.
I don't think so. I think the displays of certain kinds of animals, like the aquariums, I think those will keep going. The flamingos, fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
People can deal with that because it looks more like a zoo or an aquarium display that people are sort of familiar with, and it's not as controversial. It can be done safely. It can be done in a way where maybe the animal's easier to keep alive in some cases, or you can replace them and no one will notice. So no, I think those will continue on. But trained animal shows, other than dogs and cats and sort of domestic animals or familiar animals like the horses that are in the Excalibur show.
Yeah,
I think it'll be limited to that. And but only the future will tell. By the time Gen Z is in their 50s and 60s, we'll have to see what they're interested in.
I feel like they won't be desperate for tiger shows, but I guess we'll see. I mean, and it sounds like, from your research and looking at how we've evolved today, it doesn't seem like we need these animal shows anymore, let alone want them.
Right. Well, this is another sort of intervention that has happened, is that we have, wildlife films and documentaries, and again, the internet loaded with information about these animals live when they're at large in their own habitat, in the places that they come from. So I think that also has helped people have more of a sense that they don't want to watch an animal in a sort of trained, sort of artificial setting, entertainment setting, because they know how they live otherwise, right? And that information just puts everything in context. And so it contributes to people saying, well, these animals have a right to their own lives on their own terms. They're not just here to serve us.
Susan, thank you so much. This was truly fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed this show, share this with a friend. You can also rate us and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And you'll probably love our morning newsletter too. That's Hey Las Vegas. You can subscribe on our website. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.